Everyone, we're just gonna give it, we'll say 30 seconds, and then we'll kick it off. Let's start it. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion, Navigating the Nonprofit Landscape Post-Election. My name is Adam Holzberg. I'm an audit partner here at Sachs within our nonprofit practice. Over the past several weeks, we've been closely monitoring the rapidly evolving landscape, one that seems to shift not just day to day, but sometimes hour to hour. It's been a very long year and it's only March. So that's why we're here today, provide insight, guidance, and discussion on what lies ahead for nonprofits in this post-election environment. We gathered an incredible panel here who will share their perspectives on key challenges, opportunities, and strategies to help nonprofits navigate this moment with confidence. I want to just thank everyone who has sent questions in advance. We did incorporate that into our panel questions for today. And if you have any questions throughout the discussion, I do believe there is a box on the bottom where it says Q&A, I think, where you could input your question, and we'll try to get to those at the very end. If we don't get to your question, we'll definitely reach out personally to answer that. So before we dive into the conversation, I like each of the panelists just introduce themselves. So Lauren, we'll start with you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Lauren Frary. I'm the Director of Strategic Business Transformation and also the lead of the nonprofit consulting practice at Sachs LLP. We were each going to give kind of a 1,000-foot view of what we think is going on in the sector right now. And if I were to do that, I think probably what I would have to do is take off my business hat and put on my counselor hat and think about the fact that we are in very uncertain and confusing times, much like the pandemic of years ago. And I think what happens during these times is it provokes feelings of anxiety. And I think when we're feeling anxious, we want to do something. We want to do something to alleviate those feelings. And this is where people often make hasty or rash decisions about their businesses and their nonprofits. And so I would say during this very uncertain time, take a breath and be intentional about your decisions. Think about your next steps. And like during the pandemic, think about what you learned from that time and apply it now. We're going to all give you some practical tips on what to do, but just keep that in mind that, you know, your need to want to do something should always be met with intentional actions around your nonprofit. And with that, I'm going to move it over to Linda Zipko.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Linda Zippo, President and CEO of the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits, the charitable umbrella organization and network for the state's charitable community. Uncertainty, chaos, fear, certainly all very apt adjectives to describe the time that we are in. Some of you may have seen, we just released the results of our annual New Jersey Nonprofit Trends and Outlook report, and things kind of underscore just the uncertainty of the times that we are in. I can go into more detail, but suffice it to say that funding is still tight. Labor force issues are still acute. And on top of that, we have a flurry of executive actions from Washington that have really wreaked havoc on nonprofit programs and planning. In terms of, and again, we'll be diving into a lot of this much more deeply, a lot of things that nonprofits can do and are doing in terms of, as Lauren said, being intentional, taking a careful look at programs. I guess my other message would be we are not powerless and we are not alone. So there's a lot that we can do together as well, and happy to discuss that in more detail. But for now, I guess it's Bob's turn.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Bob Davison, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Mental Health Association. And I've been here for 25 years, and I've been in the nonprofit field for 40 years. As Lauren was saying, this era of uncertainty feels unprecedented. In fact, it's not. Just 5 years ago, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and all our strategic plans and all our contingency plans went out the window. And it appeared as if the world was ending and our nonprofits were going to collapse. It appeared that way with good reason. And many of us took a lot of steps too soon, engaged in a lot of anticipatory compliance that turned out not to be necessary. So what I think we learned from that is to take our time, see how things play out. And the way I look at it, an organization's resting face, if you would, should always be its values. So at times like this, before we know exactly what's going on, let's focus on our values and decide what we're willing to do, because sometimes you have to play ball as a nonprofit, let's be honest, and let's decide what we're not willing to do. For example, at the Mental Health Association, are we willing to play ball with the way they describe DEI and the language? Yeah, we're willing to play ball there in terms of our funding. We will never, though, say that we don't value diversity at the Mental Health Association. And if saying we value diversity causes us funding loss, then so be it.
Thank you everyone for your introductions. So I'm just going to set the stage for our conversation. So a quick snapshot of everything that's gone on. So since taking office, the new administration has issued several executive orders that have had a direct impact on nonprofits. We've seen the temporary freeze on federal contracts and grants, which have definitely caused a lot of significant stress on the organizations that rely on that funding. And while that was eventually overturned by the courts, it just kind of led to more uncertainty. This week, we are currently staring down a government shutdown, which honestly may feel like the most normal thing that's occurring right now, unfortunately. If a continuing resolution does not pass, the government will shut down at the end of this week. And if a shutdown occurs for an extended period of time, that could definitely disrupt further federal payments and critical services. Beyond the shutdown, the House recently passed a budget resolution that lays the groundwork for $2 trillion in mandatory spending cuts, of which the largest is to Energy and Commerce Committee, $880 billion. That could definitely target Medicaid and will have a direct impact on community health centers, mental health programs, and disability services. In the resolution, it proposed $330 billion in cuts for education and workforce programs, such as Head Start, child nutrition programs, Pell Grants, and workforce development initiatives. There was another $230 billion in cuts for agriculture, which would directly impact SNAP. And then there's $500 billion in unspecified cuts that we don't even know what they're targeting yet. So there's a lot going on, a lot of changing factors. So it could definitely feel very hard to really keep up with everything. So Linda, in this environment where everything's rapidly changing, what trusted sources do you recommend for nonprofits to access the most up-to-date and reliable information?
There are a few, obviously more than a few, depending on where your specialties lie. Certainly, I would suggest your own membership organization. New Jersey Center for Nonprofits and our national organization, the National Council of Nonprofits, have been keeping up with the broad-based activities, the executive orders, the other kinds of news that affect the nonprofit community as a whole. But if you're in the arts community, definitely make sure you're connected with Art Pride. Make sure you're connected with trusted professionals like Sachs. There are also trade journalist sources like Nonprofit Times, Chronicle Philanthropy, and whatnot that are keeping tabs on this. We actually have a whole list of sources and of information on our website at njnonprofits.org that people can tap into as well. So there are a lot of them, but definitely stay connected because that's going to be absolutely critical to drive decision making and advocacy.
I would also add that especially for smaller organizations, if you have relationships with connections with your local legislators, you would want to tap into them to see if there's going to be a local effect. Many of our nonprofits receive county funding and even city funding. So just make sure you're staying in touch with your council members, your assembly people, your local legislators to understand the local effect of some of these actions.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I mean, it's a two-way street. You want to hear from them as far as what they are hearing, but they need to hear from you as far as what the impact of what's going on might be on your organizations and the services that you provide in communities.
Agree.
Great points. So Linda, I want to stick with you for another moment. You mentioned advocacy. Can you break down the difference between what's considered advocacy and what's considered lobbying for everyone?
Sure. These are definitions that are laid out by the IRS, and there are regulations that govern these for nonprofits on the federal level, also some state level stuff too. But for this conversation, basically advocacy is a broad-based discussion about public policy issues, and nonprofits can do that without limitation. Lobbying is a subset of advocacy, but that involves trying to influence legislation, either by talking to the decision maker directly, your state or local legislator or member of Congress, et cetera, or the governor or the White House, et cetera. But that's legal for 501c3 nonprofits, but it is limited. You can't do it with your government funds, but you can do it with your private funds, and you have to know what the limits are. So you can advocate without limit. You can talk about general issues that don't involve legislation. So you could say we need more funding for mental health, or we, things like that. But that's really the big difference. We have a lot of information about that that goes into much more detail, but it is really important that nonprofits be in this space because there's a lot that they can do.
Right.
So actually I want to ask Bob, a question we've been getting is, a lot of nonprofit leaders want to speak out, want to get their voice heard, but they don't want to be perceived as too political in this current environment. Do you have any suggestions for other, CEOs and EDs out there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing you could do is lead with your mission and lead with your value and talk about the value that you bring to the community. What difference does your services make? And it really shouldn't matter whether you're speaking to a Republican, Democrat, conservative, fascist, or communist audience. It really shouldn't matter, particularly if you're a mission-driven nonprofit. As it happens, a lot of our services provided in Essex County, which is a very blue area, and a lot of our services are also provided in Morris County, which is a very red area. I never change my messaging because it's always about the consumer and their families and the value that we bring to them.
And I think that, a really good tool for that messaging is your annual report or your annual impact report. I'm always advising nonprofits, make sure in some way, shape, or form you have an annual report, an impact report. It is a great way to outline who you are, what you do, and the impact you have in the community. And if that is readily available, then you can kind of spread the word far and wide and make sure people understand, like you said, Bob, what you're doing and the value of your organization in the community.
And of course, all of this is about relationships. So you want to build those relationships, preferably before you need to ask for something. But I'm sure, it's just like fundraising. You want to make sure you build your relationships so that everybody understands what your organization is about, what you stand for, what you do in the community, and why it matters, what happens to your ability to provide your services.
Yeah, two of our biggest supporters here at the Mental Health Association is Senator John McKeon, a staunch Democrat, and Senator Anthony Bucco, a staunch Republican, that both value mental health and addiction recovery services. So we're happy to call both of them friends.
That's great. So I want move towards the strategies and what can nonprofits do today, in spite of everything going on. So Bob, I'm going to ask you. So what proactive steps can nonprofits take now to safeguard their current funding, in spite of all these federal and potentially state budget cuts?
Well, I think the two most important things that they can do is educate others with evidence. All right, we spoke about that before. What's the outcomes? What's the measurable difference that we make in people's lives? And then the second most important thing we can do is focus on our local impact. Lauren spoke about that earlier. For example, I know that the majority party in Washington, D.C. is considering cutting Medicaid by $880 billion over 10 years. That's a huge cut, particularly if you're a healthcare nonprofit like we are. For example, in New Jersey, the budget for Medicaid in New Jersey only is $24 billion. $14 billion of that comes from the federal government. So if the proposed cuts of the majority party go through, that's going to be about $5 billion a year to the state of New Jersey. That's going to trickle down to organizations like the Mental Health Association. That seems overwhelming because it is. But what can we do? What we can do is focus locally. As it happens, we provide services in Tom Kaine's district. Congressman Kaine happens to be a moderate Republican who perhaps would not support these cuts. I can't speak for him. I don't know that, but I think there's an opportunity there. So we're going to visit later this month with his chief of staff and as many people that are associated with the Mental Health Association that live in his district that will fit in the office. That's what I'm going to bring with me. We're going to sit down and educate the chief of staff with evidence why Medicaid is important to Congressman Kaine's constituents.
That's great. So Lauren, I'm going to ask you now. A topic of conversation that's always been out there, even before everything going on, is diversifying your revenue streams, which probably is even more important now with everything going on. So, do you recommend, what specific strategies would you recommend to kind of pursue that?
I think there's a variety of things that, again, people should be actively doing, but really also now focusing on. One thing is there's always that great debate about, should I be focusing on cultivating new donor relationships or retaining my current donor relationships? I think right now, if you had to choose between one activity, hopefully you don't have to choose between the two, you really do want to focus on preserving your current donors. Why? They know you. They have a relationship with you. They want to support you. So make sure you're engaged in activities that really retain and preserve your current donors. Make sure that you're acknowledging them and make sure you're being honest and transparent with them about what's going on and how the current landscape might actually affect your organization. A lot of times when funders have a relationship with you, they are going to step up, not step away. and support you even more or find other resources for you. So that's one thing you should be doing. I think the other thing you want to do is you want to identify your uniqueness. And to Bob's point, right, making sure people understand how you uniquely support and impact your communities. Is it a unique program model? Is it a unique population? Is it a unique geography? But find what makes you unique in the nonprofit space. And then always, always, always create an annual fundraising plan. So again, you are intentional throughout the year about your activities that support fundraising. And at a minimum, your annual fundraising plan should include elements of marketing, education and outreach, your appeals, annual and otherwise, events, grants, and of course, most importantly, cultivation and stewardship activities. I would definitely start there.
Piggybacking on what you're saying about outreach. So Lauren, so how could nonprofits effectively communicate with their stakeholders and funders to maintain trust and support during this time?
I think transparency is the key. Honesty and transparency, right? Let people know, what is happening to your organization, and more importantly, how it will influence the services that you provide and potentially impact the community, especially if it's going to be a negative impact, right? So if you are engaged in a program that provides SNAP benefits or supports SNAP benefits, and you think that's going to be affected, you need to educate the community on what does that actually look like for a family who has SNAP benefits. What is the actual impact? So I think transparency and honesty are the most important things and ways to communicate with your community and your funders so that they can actually mobilize and try to support you in other ways.
I would also just jump in to say this is a perfect opportunity to have some conversations with our partners in the funding community about simplifying processes and simplifying and making grants more flexible, more stable. This is something that we've been very active about among many others, and we work very closely with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, which is the membership organization for the state's philanthropic community. But going back to the COVID parallel, when COVID first hit, funders looked at their processes and made a lot of them more flexible. They provided the chance for organizations to repurpose funds if they couldn't hold an event, or to change their annual report to something a lot more simple, or having a conversation. Plenty of things that were done, and it allowed the work to continue in really important ways without having those unnecessary hoops. We're not talking about lack of accountability. We're talking about changing the way the partnership works. And these are things which hopefully can continue to be expanded on, made permanent. And this is another one of those times, because nonprofits are going to need that flexibility in order to be nimble and respond to the changing circumstances in their communities. And that's where a good, strong partnership with funders, with donors, can make all the difference.
Which reminds me, as a nonprofit organization, you should never waste a crisis. For example, during the pandemic, because we had to, we went from 98% in-person services to 95% telehealth services in 3 days, because we had no other choice. In fact, we should have done that already, but we didn't have to. It took a crisis to motivate us. It motivated us, and we have continued to benefit from that improvement in our technology. So we're going to have some crises coming up, and that'll be an opportunity to deal with things, including some things we should have dealt with already.
I think that's a really good point. And I think also to Linda's point, when talking with our funders and our supporters and our donors, right? Oftentimes you can actually ask for a one-time grant or donation to support you through this difficult time. And I've actually met several funders recently who said, yeah, go ahead and make that one-time ask and we'll put it in front of our board. So I think all three of us agree that if you don't ask, you'll never know, right? And two, transparency and communication with the people that support you is going to be key during this time.
Great points. Definitely, there's a famous quote, never let crisis go to waste.
I love it.
It definitely applies now then. So I'm gonna ask each of you this next one, but Bob, I'm gonna give you the first chance to answer. What financial planning practices can help nonprofits remain stable during periods of uncertainty, like right now?
Well, the best practice, financial practice, is to operate your agency to the extent that it's possible with a strong cash flow and a strong cash position and a generous endowment. I know not every nonprofit is in that position, but if you're not, I would recommend that you work towards that position for the next crisis, right? So in 2008, when the banking system collapsed and the market collapsed, we did not have a strong cash position. We did not have a healthy endowment. And as a result of that, that crisis relative to the cuts that came later, that I'm sure Linda recalls, weathering that crisis was a lot more difficult than weathering financially the pandemic, because we went into the pandemic with a strong endowment and a strong cash position. So, that's the best thing you can do. But for some of us, that ship has already sailed because we're here now. In terms of being here now, basically, all we really can do, I would encourage people not to speculate too much. Just take the information that you have based upon President Trump's executive orders and the current acts of Congress. We've identified 3 or 4 funding streams that might be at risk, and we've come up with a contingency to deal with that. We haven't given it a lot of thought, quite frankly, because who knows if it's going to happen, but we're not going to be caught flat-footed either. We're also taking a look at the state budget. I don't know if people realize, but the state budget over the next 2 or 3 years is going to be no picnic. I think we can anticipate some cuts coming out of there too. So we're already thinking about how we would deal with various cuts, including facing hard realities. Unfortunately, from time to time, a nonprofit has to face a hard reality. And if the funding for an entire program is eliminated and we have no other way of operating that program financially, then the program unfortunately has to be eliminated. In regards to that, I always recommend people take their poison as soon as possible in a way that treats the employees with dignity and gives them some notice. But the longer you put off difficult positions, particularly ones that have financial impacts, the bigger the problem is going to be.
Sure.
I would just add to that, Bob covered quite a bit there. If you haven't done a sort of cost-benefit analysis of each of your programs, now is a great time to do that. There may be programs that are not paying for themselves, but if you can subsidize them elsewhere and you determine that they are worth keeping, then that's one thing. If you can't or shouldn't be keeping up with maintaining a program, as Bob said, this is a perfect time to, if you haven't looked at them in a while, take a hard look at what your programs are doing. Are they serving the community in the best possible way? Are there other unmet needs that perhaps you could be stepping in to fill, or of course partnering with other organizations? If you can't provide a service, maybe there's somebody else who can or is already doing that. So that's why being in constant touch and communication and coordination with the community is absolutely critical. But to Bob's point, this is, if you haven't been doing these kinds of analyses, now is a great time to do it. There are also, again, great resources. One is called Propel Nonprofits they actually have formulas and worksheets and whatnot, very, very accessible information that can help you in terms of analyzing your organization. But those are just a few other things I would just add to the mix.
Yeah, for example, we have profit and loss statements on all our programs. So we know exactly what programs are making money and what programs are losing money. And no surprise, some of our programs lose money, but that's done on purpose in a mission-driven way. We're not surprised by that. So as changes come down the pike, we may have to reassess that. And maybe some of those programs having nothing to do with their value, unfortunately, we won't be able to continue to operate.
I think also for the smaller nonprofits, those who may not have the luxury of an endowment, what they really need to focus on is a really good cash flow analysis, as you mentioned, Bob, and making sure that the board actually understands the cash flow and the cash analysis of the organization. A board can't exercise their fiduciary responsibility if they don't have adequate information. So I think cash flow reports are key for the smaller nonprofits. I also think that the smaller nonprofits want to focus on, if not an endowment, their reserve account. Best practice right now is probably 3 to 6 months, if not more, in reserves of operating cash. And so sometimes it's literally, we vow to put $100 a month away, but commit to something to build up your reserves going forward. And if you don't have a line of credit and you can apply for one, I think that you should. A line of credit, again, is a little extra protection during a difficult time that you can rely on. So for the smaller nonprofits, I think that those are 3 things that you can do. Focus on your cash flow analysis, build up your reserves, and research a line of credit.
The best time to apply for a line of credit is when you don't need one.
I know.
Often the way.
But give it a try.
And one other point I want to emphasize that Lauren made, to the extent possible, never surprise your board. If there's ugly information that needs to be shared, I highly recommend sharing it because you just don't want to surprise your board. Sometimes you can't help it, but to the extent possible, never surprise your board.
Absolutely.
No, yeah, thank you. I thought those were all great answers. As a financial guy, I want to make sure all 3 were answering. So for that one, that was a special question. But no, I love your answers on that one. I thought it was all great points. So talking about now like long-term sustainability, Lauren, so what strategic approaches should nonprofits consider to really enhance their long-term sustainability?
Sure. So, I mean, something that I think nonprofits should do actually as a regular practice, but certainly during uncertain times, is engage in some contingency and scenario planning, right? So when you're developing your budget, I always recommend when you develop your annual budget for the operating budget for the organization, at the same time, develop a contingency budget, right? And you can do that through some scenario planning, kind of imagine a worst case scenario and how you would deal with that with your current resources. So definitely engage in those activities. Again, I think building up your reserves and getting a line of credit when appropriate, you should do that. And then I think that, again, this should be a regular practice. Make sure that you are creating some strategic alliances or partnerships with fellow or like nonprofits. That way you have each other to lean on. And as I think, Bob, you had mentioned this too, if you need to modify, close, or reduce a program, maybe you can refer the people that you are serving to another organization that provides similar services, right? So you want to have those strategic alliances set up now so that if you need to rely on each other in the future, you've already created those relationships. I think the third thing is make sure that you and your board understand your core mission. Oftentimes I see nonprofits engage in what I call mission creep, right? During good times, there's a pot of money over there and you kind of go for it. It's not really what you do, but you figure you can do it for a little while. Don't. Stay with your mission, understand your core mission, don't engage in mission creep, so that you can continue to impact your community in your unique way.
Actually, so Lauren, you mentioned strategic alliances. Can you just kind of go over what's strategic alliance versus what's a merger versus shared services and how they all kind of relate?
So in my view, a strategic alliance it is not a legal per se partnership, but it can be solidified with an MOU where two or more organizations agree that they've got similar or like missions, values, or programs, and want to actually connect with each other and share resources, programs, and other values so that they can actually strengthen each other. So it's about strengthening each other by sharing resources. So it's an informal, maybe an MOU process. Mergers and acquisitions is more of a legal process. I'm going to let Bob talk about that a little bit because he has a little bit more experience with me than that with me. But I think everybody should think about where are their partnerships, where are their strategic alliances, where are there places where you can, get together with like organizations.
So Bob, do you want to go over a little bit about mergers, acquisitions, and potentially successful stories?
Sure. Well, just to speak a little bit to Lauren's point, I think collaboration is so important. It's actually one of our corporate values. For example, we work a lot with Community Hope, Newbridge, Family Connections, Project Live, Comprehensive Behavioral Health Care, Care Plus. They're all other nonprofit mental health and addiction recovery agencies that sometimes we compete against them. We go for the same grant, and that's fine. We compete with a small case C. But the reality is, if we weren't collaborating with them, we could not be successful. We could not be as successful as we are. And, I'd like to think they think the same about us. So I don't know how you can exist as a nonprofit without collaborating, cooperating, and on occasion competing with your friends and neighbors in the area. I think that's good. I think that makes us all better. And in regards to mergers and the like, we had a unsuccessful merger negotiation with a very high quality organization in North Jersey. We went through the negotiations. We decided the merger wasn't in the best interest for either organization. That turned out to be the right decision. Both the Mental Health Association and this other organization has gone on to be extremely successful or continue their success. However, in 2017, the Mental Health Association of Essex County, where I was working at the time, we merged with the Mental Health Association of Morris County. And that merger has worked fantastically largely because we had the same values and we had the same mission. And we were willing to compromise and cooperate with each other. And I'm very grateful for that merger and the economies of scale that we got from it and the learned expertise that we were able to share with each other. Because as a result of that, we got through the pandemic in much better shape than we would have if we were two separate organizations.
So let's get the opinion of all three of you. I know mergers aren't always the nicest word in the nonprofit sector, but strategic alliances or shared services, maybe not mergers, but something a little below that. Do you think, based on the current situation, the current, landscape of what's going on, do you think that's maybe a good strategy for a lot of nonprofits to potentially pursue?
I guess I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Linda, please. You're next.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I'll jump in for a minute here. And, there is the whole spectrum of what kinds of partnership activities can happen. And merger is on the, one end of it, and, very informal activities are on the other. I often say, and I firmly believe, that nonprofits, from those who don't necessarily interact with them regularly, sometimes get a bad rap for among people who don't think they collaborate. I think nonprofits collaborate quite a bit and do things really effectively and creatively. Will the current circumstance force or prompt more of that? Sure. I mean, there's no question about it. The other thing I will say, though, is the worst reason to merge. If you want to explore a merger or something very formal, you need to do it for the right reasons. And of course, Bob did his for the very right reasons. Lots of other organizations have done that. But the worst reason to do it is because your funder told you to, or all sorts of other things like that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of things that can be done. Sharing office space. We share office space with the New Jersey Association of Mental Health and Addiction Agencies. Sharing staff or back office functions, all sorts of things. If you haven't explored those, there are lots of opportunities to do that. The other thing, this has nothing to do with mergers, but if you haven't looked at some of your ongoing expenses in a while to see if there are some economies, there may be some things to do there. If you haven't shopped out your insurance policies in a while, if you haven't, if you're just kind of by habit renewing the same one over and over again, just take some time to explore. There may be some improvements in your policies or cost savings to be had, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of different ways to try to arrange and cope and whatnot. But again, I mean, I've said it over and over. We're not going to get through this unless we work together. And so that's absolutely key in whichever way and through whatever lens you're looking at that.
Yeah, nothing focuses the mind like an oncoming train, right? So as funding tightens, and I believe funding, regardless of who was elected in the last cycle and who's going to be elected in November, I've been of the belief and saying so that, money in the nonprofit sector was going to tighten. We kind of come out of our salad years as a result of the pandemic, and the wheel always turns. So, money, I believe, is going to tighten over the next 3 to 5 year period. So we'll have no other choice but to consider strategic alliances and the like.
The other thing I'm going to mention in case I don't get a chance to do it or in case I forget is that it's absolutely incumbent upon us as nonprofits to make sure that people in government, that our friends in philanthropy, that our donors, the public, and whatnot understand that there are consequences when we are not funded properly. And that has been happening for too many years. Again, lots of, not exclusively under one set of leaders or another. Nonprofits are sadly and chronically underfunded for the work that they do. And it's always expected that nonprofits are somehow going to find a way to do more with less. There are limits to that, and we have beyond reached them. So it is incumbent upon us to, as we're communicating the impact and the value that we're doing and why it is important to be supportive of the work of nonprofits, that funding become we maintain funding as part of that conversation because there are consequences, real life consequences in our communities if cuts go through, if funding continues to be shaved away or slashed.
I love that comment.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
All right, so Linda's actually sticking with you. How can nonprofits build resilience and adaptability to ensure they maintain and they remain effective and relevant in this changing environment?
I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of it. A lot of it has to do with looking internally at your systems and your communications and your financial well-being and whatnot. Communication, advocacy, all of that is, it all kind of combines into a whole. And as we're talking about a thriving or successful or sustainable organization, again, that, we are in very, very challenging times. I guess the other thing I would absolutely mention, and again, it's on the most fundamental level, make sure that we are prioritizing wellness because these are extremely stressful times, and it's going to be and is already reflected in our teams, in our communities, and that has to be a priority as well if we're going to plan to be resilient or sustain our operations. The other thing I would say, and again, it goes against all of the conversations we've been having about cuts and whatnot, is we do need to take a good, hard look at how we compensate people on our teams. Again, it is sadly too common for compensation, especially among entry-level staffers and whatnot, to not be as competitive as it is in other sectors. And that's one of the reasons that contributes to the workforce shortage that nonprofits have been experiencing. So if we're talking about long-term sustainability and we're talking about long-term success, making sure that we are doing right by our people is absolutely top of that list.
And I think you make a really good point, because the cost of turnover is so exuberant, and being penny wise and compensating your current staff appropriately is in the long run going to help with retention, and then actually save money in terms of the cost of turnover. So I think that it's a point well taken. I think that there's other things that we can also do. Think about where you can find additional resources for your organization. It may not be financial resources, but it may be other resources that can offset some expenses. And I think that some of the places you can go to ask for additional resources are, of course, your board. You know, your board is with you, they're dedicated to you and your mission. Ask your board what other resources they have in their personal or their professional networks that might support your efforts. Your funders, of course, we've talked about that a lot, right? Talk to your funders, be transparent, and see if they can offer additional supports, resources to your organization. And then, of course, most, if not all, nonprofits have a relationship with a bank. Make sure you go to the people that you know at your financial institutions and ask them, do they have other resources that you could benefit from, again, to help offset some of your other expenses?
And actually, to build on that too, there are resources for skills-based volunteers, whether that's through corporate donors, partners, et cetera, or through places like Catch a Fire or Taproot Foundation, which make a point of connecting skills-based volunteers, often for specific projects, but those can be really valuable resources to help stretch your capacity as well.
And just to follow up on something Linda said, even during difficult times, it's important to compensate your staff appropriately. It may be even more important during difficult times. We feel so strongly about it at the Mental Health Association that we actually contract with a outside entity to do an independent analysis of our compensation to make sure that we're on level with the field. I know this isn't a commercial for Saks, but Saks is doing ours right now. And, you know, I think it's important that it's the type of thing that we engage in from time to time, just to ensure that our staff are compensated appropriately. And this is a value judgment I've made, and reasonable people can disagree about it. I'd rather pay less people more. I think that's a more effective way to do business.
Good points. So we're getting towards the end. I have one more question, unless some additional questions come in. So one thing that we were asked a few times on registration was about DEI. But I'm going to ask you this question because you brought up DEI in the very beginning. So a lot of people are concerned that even though they may not be receiving federal funding, and therefore not directly impacted from funding cuts, if they have DEI initiatives or programs, are there still any implications from them, from the government?
Oh, you know, here at the Mental Health Association, we never adopted the DEI language because I noticed when I asked 20 people what that meant, I got 27 different answers, and it meant different things to different people. Having said that, as I mentioned earlier, we value, to the point of almost a religion, we value diversity. We think it's important that we have a diverse staff that includes in regards to race and gender and sexuality to serve our diverse community. That's something that we value, and we're never gonna back off of that and let the chips fall where they may. We also greatly value, as a mental health provider, serving the gay community and the queer community, because we know that community largely because of a stigma and largely because of prejudice as a disproportionate impact in regards to mental health. And they're more likely to be depressed, anxious, engaged in suicidal ideation, and the like. And we will never stop providing services to that community in a culturally competent way. Having said that, you know, are we going to put things on our website and in our documents that purposely poke the bear? No. But we're going to continue to do the right thing based upon our values, and I don't care what the language police in Washington, D.C. say.
I would just say this is an area of obvious distress in terms of what some of the with some of the executive orders have said, what some of the directives have come down with respect to funding. But there are directives that are instructing that nonprofits, larger funders and whatnot, and private entities be investigated because of their commitment to DEI, which is not defined in these regulations, or in these orders. These are not regulations. These are orders from the executive branch. So all of this to say, this is very, very fluid. People are undertaking examinations of what they are doing, trying to make sure that they're living their values and maintaining their mission and being true to that. But there is, and the state of New Jersey, the Attorney General, along with 16 others or 15 others, issued guidance to employers to try to provide a framework with respect to navigating this on the employment side. There's a link to this on our website. But because and again, I'm not an attorney, but this guidance said essentially that discrimination is illegal. Discrimination has always been illegal, but DEI is not the same. And so again, definitely you don't want to do anything without finding actual legal guidance and whatnot. And a lot of these rules have already been challenged. Some of them are on hold. So the no way to overstate how important the legal community has been in this current time. But I would just caution, doing some of that examination, talking again with your board, talking with legal counsel if you are able, to make sure that you are doing that what you are doing in terms of your programs and practices are upholding your values and mitigating risk to the degree that you can.
And I agree with everything that Linda just said, but I'll also say this. If you're not willing to put your organization's reputation at risk and your funding at risk for something that you value, then you really don't value it. So you have to decide.
Yeah. I think there's also, I think DEI was born out of, right, non-discrimination policies and cultural competency policies, right? It's an extension of those policies. And I think organizations need to have, you must have strong non-discrimination policies and statements, and certainly cultural competency. And then how you approach DEI should absolutely come from a place of values as opposed to kind of the current trend, right? Most nonprofits are their service is to a diverse population, be it disability, aging, mental health, food insecurity. By virtue of being a nonprofit, most of us are already engaged in working with a diverse population, right? It's how we talk about it. And I think, syntax starts to kind of come to play here, right? But I think that you absolutely, at the very least, have to have strong non-discrimination and cultural competency statements.
All great points. So we are getting towards the end. We do have a list here of resources that people can access. Feel free to take a screenshot or, take a picture with your phone, and you can take a look at these different resources out there. They all have very valuable information, different strategies, different things that'll be updated as new things occur. So definitely links to bookmark. With that, we have about 5 minutes left. So I thought maybe just closing remarks. Maybe about a minute each. So Bob, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think at times of uncertainty, humor is very important. Please keep your sense of humor. Remember to laugh. If you want to laugh, send me your cell phone number and I'll send you some highly amusing memes of Elon Musk, the stupid black suit with his chainsaw.
Linda?
A lot of what has already been said. We're not alone. We can do amazing things when we work together. Please stay in touch, check out the resources, and let us know what you need and what you're experiencing, because we are here for you and with you, and we want to be helpful.
So I would say, nonprofit work is intense by nature. It's always intense, and now it's just a little bit more intense. So please make sure that you are engaged in self-care for yourself as a leader, for your staff, who are people, boots on the ground, and always, always, always stay true to your mission.
Well, thank you to the three of you for partaking in this. I hope everyone found this very valuable. Those great insights. And as information occurs, new developments, we'll SACS will definitely provide updates to everyone. So hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Adam.
you.